Hi, I'm Dana Denha, and you're watching FYI. Sometimes in dire situations, our first responders need a helping hand. Find out how regular citizens learn to assist emergency responders and better prepare themselves in the event of a disaster. Next. The Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT, is a group of locals dedicated to keeping our streets and neighborhoods safe.
How the program works is when first responders are called for a tornado, for a hazardous material spill, for any type of situation where our first responders, our police, our fire, our EMS personnel are going to be overwhelmed with calls or with service, the CERT team would then be activated by our emergency manager. The process would be they would report to a certain location, they are debriefed on the situation, and then they're given specific duties.
When the real thing actually comes, they'll know exactly what to do. So they bring in actors and volunteers like me to basically just act out what a real thing would do. So that way, when the real thing or a real tornado comes, the CERT team will have the perfect training.
And training is a large part of being on the CERT team. Individuals must complete a 20-hour course to prepare for an array of emergency medical situations like light search and rescue, team organization, and disaster medical skills.
The actions of CERT, we want it to become second nature. We want it to become something that they do in their own personal life, as well as when we call them out for an activation. It doesn't only provide for the team training, but it provides them in their own communities with their own families on how to prepare and how to respond to a disaster situation.
At the end of the course, a final exam puts their skills to the test. In this natural disaster, CERT teams were called in to assist first responders after the effects of a devastating tornado.
The fire department has not been able to get here for probably approximately 4 hours, so we've had victims laying around in pain, unconscious, wandering around, not knowing what's going on. There's no communication. And the CERT team's called out to check the area and see if there's any victims and anybody in need of help.
They took care of me, they sat me down, they asked me a bunch of questions, they made sure that I was okay, they made sure that I was stable.
As far as the devastation of a tornadoes, we've seen them. We try to prepare as much as possible. There's never going to be a total preparation for any disaster, whether it's man-made or natural, but this is a way to get started.
It's unusual to see men versus women in the high school sports arena, but Skyline and Pioneer High Schools did just that for a very worthy cause. Find out more next. The Veda Murray Fund for Cancer Research benefits the University of Michigan Health System's aim to expand research for early detection treatments for lung cancer. At the age of 42, Veda lost his battle to this deadly disease, and now this fund is dedicated to saving others diagnosed with the illness.
Veda Murray was a University of Michigan football player, and a very good one. And after playing under Bo Schembechler, he decided to become a police officer after his collegiate career. And giving up a chance to play in the NFL, he decided to serve the community and did so for over 20 years, serving with the Ann Arbor Police Department.
No matter who you talk to, everyone has a story of someone close to them that's been touched by cancer, and it's always tough. And to be able to help contribute to research and development of cures, for lung and any cancer, really, it makes you feel better.
For the second year in a row, Pioneer and Skyline High Schools support the foundation by playing men's versus women's lacrosse, with all the proceeds going to cancer research.
Veda had a way of impacting everyone, not only the people that he served each and every day, but also the people he worked with. And this is kind of epitomizes that. All the people here, the young athletes, everybody here is carrying on his legacy and how he has the ability to touch people.
Both high schools simultaneously held games for the charity, with a drone delivering the game ball and a little sibling rivalry.
One of our captains for the varsity men's team's little sister is a freshman who's on the girls' varsity team, so they're going to take the first face-off against each other.
We've kind of been competitive our whole life, so.
Everybody's here to come together for a little competition, but also for a greater cause to raise money for the Veda Murray Cancer Research Fund.
It's nice when the kids realize that lacrosse isn't everything. Being in high school isn't everything. There are things much bigger, much more important.
Raising money for cancer research couldn't be a better thing for me, and it's an awesome feeling.
Henry Ford unwittingly changed the face of America. His history has deep roots that affected the nation. Ford was born into a farming family in Dearborn, Michigan, but soon realized his disdain for working the crops. When Ford discovered his inclination for mechanical devices, he created a new age in America while changing the landscape of the nation's future. Joining me is Richard Snow, author of I Invented the Modern Age, The Rise of Henry Ford. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Richard, you're a native of New York from what you've told
Absolutely.
me.
Absolutely. I have no right to Henry Ford.
So what attracted you to Henry Ford, Michigan's own?
I'll tell you, it's sort of interesting. When he's a young man, his friends said he had a magical ability to draw people to him. They wanted to work with him. They wanted to help him. And one of them said, you know, that man, he's got the magnet. Henry has the magnet. And I felt the tug of that magnet when I went to his really wonderful museum, the Henry Ford. Well, as I'm sure I don't have to tell people in your audience, it's a fascinating place, but it shows so much about Ford. I mean, for instance, his capacity for taking pains. When he brought Thomas Edison's lab up from New Jersey, he also brought 7 freight car loads of New Jersey dirt so it could literally stand on its native ground. And the whole place sort of reflects him. He loved watches, loved all machines. So he's got 3 watchmaker shops there. But there's no attorney's office, no nice old country bank, because he thought lawyers and bankers were leeches. They had no. So, you know, walking through it is like walking through Henry Ford's brain, and it's a very interesting place to be. It's also beautiful. Yeah.
So you mentioned that he didn't like banks and stuff like that, and one of the things you talk about in the book is that he did not want any shareholders for Ford Motor Company.
No, it was funny. This man who was perhaps one of the half-dozen most successful capitalists of all time hated capitalism, and he basically thought that investors who were making money off a successful investment he called them parasites. These were friends of his, but he thought once he got the Model T going, they were stealing from him, and he tried rather sleazy tricks to shake them. But he was a man of serious contradictions right from the time he was a boy. He was a farmer who, as you say, who hated farming. He loved the idea of the farm. He thought that was a very virtuous place to be, but he thought, as he said, there's too much work on the place. And so even as a child, he was looking at machinery as a way to shift the burden of work from people to machines.
So we've all heard the story of Henry Ford. So what makes your story different?
Well, I know a friend, when I started working on this book and told a friend of mine the subject, he said, isn't that story about as well known as the Nativity? And, you know, and I certainly knew what he meant, but a couple of things I thought as I was reading it. One is that, you know, we know he made a lot of cars, and we know his history is bunk, and we know the ugly stuff about anti-Semitism, but I think in a way his influence was so pervasive. In a way, we don't understand how vast it was. It was almost like, you know, as invisible as the air we breathe. But the other thing that I don't think I've ever seen done in a book is I know of no other inventor who felt such a passionate emotional tie to his invention. Henry Ford had done everything he wanted to do when he invented the Model T. It changed America in 5 years, and when it came time to change it, he became angrier and angrier because he thought it was perfection. He saw it not only as a car and a nice means of transportation and a very nice means of making him the richest man in America, he saw it as almost a moral object. And I think you can't really understand him without understanding this genuine love he had for this one machine.
I mean, it really made him who he was, but it was also his downfall in a sense, too.
Yes, again, it's part of that love. It was a first-generation car, if you will. It did everything a pioneer automobile should be. It rearranged the social network in a matter of years. It was can't think of another change that overtook the country so quickly. But at the end of that time, he would not change tiny changes in the engine and stuff. Basically, the car you bought in 1922 was the car you bought in 1912. And at the same time, a whole generation of other car makers have grown up that saw the automobile not only as a good way to get around, but as an object of desire, as a place that you wanted to be comfortable. You wanted to, it should look a little distinctive. It shouldn't look like every other car on the road. And Ford's very capable son, Edsel, was urging him to change it. All his lieutenants were urging him to change it, and it's basically his response was to fire them all. And a very mean and ugly streak came into his character as he held this rearguard action.
Well, one thing that he did, so he was known as like having this mean streak and stuff, but he he doubled minimum wage for his employees so they could actually buy the Model T.
Absolutely. That was what, yes, and that was an even greater you know, the moving assembly line and that were even greater contributions than the mechanical genius of the car itself. He in a stroke doubled the working wage from like $2.50 to $5 a day, and in doing that, he made it possible for his workers to buy his product. He basically put tens of thousands of people into the middle class, and when other companies had to follow suit, they did too. So in a very large extent, he was responsible for creating the middle class as we know it or knew it in the 20th century. And again, I say, when he was a young man, and during this very creative time in his life, I think he was a genuinely great man. He was generous and philanthropic, but the second half of his life just soured and soured, and it makes for very, I mean, I tell the story in the book, but I pretty much get off the main thrust in 1927 when he finally very reluctantly shut down the Model T, because that was very much a decisive closing of the greatest chapter of his life.
I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but a lot of times books that are written accurately about history can be a little stiff, but your book is written so much like a novel that it's such an easy read and it's so interesting. It feels like you're almost reading like a fiction book.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so glad you feel that way. I mean, what fascinated me about Ford was the story, and I do try to, I hope it's accurate, I do try to tell it as a story, because really his early life and struggles are a great epic. It's easy to forget how the amount of courage it required to even decide to build automobiles when he did. You know, when he wanted a carburetor, he had to invent a carburetor. There wasn't even a word in the language yet. He was a true pioneer, and in those days, a very brave one.
Well, thank you, Richard. That's all the time we have, but it's a great book, and I suggest anyone going out and reading it because, I mean, it is a story we've all heard, but it's different. It's a different take on it, and it's very interesting.
Thank you very much.
This and other city TV programs are available for viewing online. Visit a2gov.org/CTN and click the Video on Demand button. If you have any questions or comments about FYI, email ctn@a2gov.org. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time to FYI.